Good evening.
Hi, Bill. So just last week
Right.
we had a pretty good conversation once we got over. So I wanted to just give a quick recap. We talked about the coin. It's interesting interaction of they're trying to trap Jesus,
Yeah.
and
Again.
they basically have all these groups of people together at the Temple Mount, just waiting for him to make one of them mad so they can discredit him. Right?
Right. And I'm asking, is that unusual for all of those groups to be there at the same time?
It wouldn't be unusual at this particular time of the different responses to the different Jewish responses to be there.
Right.
Because remember, we're in the week of Passover.
Okay, so everyone would have been in town anyway.
Yes.
So he picked a perfect time to come
Yeah, we're
and
celebrating
face.
the Passover. I've got all these people here. So it has this unique opportunity. And the Jewish leaders go, well, we also have this unique opportunity for this outsider who hasn't been known in this area as much. He's been kind of outside a fringe guy, that now he's being respectful. He's coming to the Passover celebration and he's kind of made us look bad and attacked us a little bit. We need to draw some attention to him of a teaching that everybody's going to have a different opinion, so we can start to shave off his following and invite those people back into the traditional following. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Well, you said attacking. He hasn't been attacking them. He's been answering them in a way that they're not used to being
Right. Now he has
talked about.
challenged, right?
Yeah.
He's talking about he talked about the promise, and he talked about the son and
Right.
right in the vineyard and taking care of the vineyard, and they would go, well, yeah, we're God's going to take the vineyard and the care of the vineyard away from the Romans. He's going to give it back to us.
Right.
They're like, well, what should they do with these people who killed all these servants? How would the master of the house, or how would the owner, after they've even killed his son, how would he,
React. Yeah.
how would they, well, he should kill those wretches.
Right.
And he's like, that's exactly what he's going to do to you. And they're like,
They didn't realize at that point that he was talking about them,
he's talking about them.
but they did toward the end of the
Yeah, so
teaching.
now
Yeah.
they're trying to, so they find this controversial issue. Well, should we pay taxes? Should we pay tribute?
Yeah.
Right? It's tribute.
Yeah.
Should we
Well,
make this tribute offering?
I think that that's where a lot of us get confused.
Yes.
Is that it's really not a tax, even though that's the way it was translated. But you
Right.
explained that the word used, translated correctly, would have been tribute or
Yes.
an acknowledgement,
Yeah.
as opposed to payment of any kind.
Right. And it's not going to be a denarius that's brought to him.
Yeah, it's just
That's a poor translation.
Yeah.
Really poor translation.
or a penny or anything to do with actual coinage or
Right.
money of the realm. It was just a metal token.
Yeah, it was a tribute coin, a specific coin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's going to be that tribute coin. And so he says, who has a tribute coin? And why is it significant that he's asking this question? Where are they?
They're on the Temple Mount.
Yeah, they're on the
right
Temple
there
Mount.
at the temple, and
In the
that
outer
coin
courts of the
should
temple.
yeah, that coin shouldn't even be in the temple.
Shouldn't even be there. It's
But
not.
somebody has
So he
one.
says, hey, hand me a coin. And the guy's like, well, I've got one. He pulls it out of his pocket thinking, and as he hands it to Jesus, Jesus is like, I got you. Don't you worry.
What are you doing with this if you are a believer?
And the reality is,
Yeah.
as he's handing it over, he's saying, hey, we know it's okay. Like, you don't have to tell us.
But we know
We already know your side, right? We already know what side you're on.
you're already ready to pay tribute. to
Yeah, don't
Caesar.
worry. Yeah, we've got you.
And we also talked about the fact that they take these tribute coins not to the temple
Right.
where they celebrate, but they take it to a separate temple
Yes.
which is built in order to honor and pay tribute to Caesar.
To Caesar, yes.
Exactly.
So Jesus holds up the coin, probably about this big. He says, whose image is here and whose inscription
Right.
is on this coin?
They say Caesar.
Caesar. He says, then, the King James says, then render
Unto Caesar.
Unto Caesar. The NIV or one of those versions says, then give back to Caesar
Okay.
that which is Caesar's. Is that where he stops?
No.
How does he continue on that statement?
And render unto God that which is God's.
And render unto God that which is God's. He says, hey, this coin that has the image of Caesar, that was created by Caesar to honor Caesar, go ahead and just give that back to him because it's already his.
Yeah.
But don't give to Caesar what is rightful to give to God.
Right.
And the implicit question that is being asked in response by Jesus is, whose image is on this coin? But then whose image is on you and on your life?
Yeah.
and
How
on
are
what
you
you're doing?
reflecting? How are you reflecting the God that you claim to
That's right.
understand?
Who, and you can give Caesar back his coin, but don't give him your worship.
Yeah.
Because everybody was ambiguous and didn't make a statement about, well, you buy the coin and then you give the coin back, but then what do you do next? Because the custom of the Gentiles and the Romans, well, they exchanged that coin, they got their incense, and they burnt their incense as an offering to Caesar.
Right.
So I think that's a really, really important question that we should wrestle with. Whose image is on you? That's it for today. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, we also have been, and the way we've been reading this, I've read it all my life, is that that's where it stops, and the depth to which we examine that said, like you said, Caesar's image is on the coin. We never talk about whose image is on you or who are you reflecting.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and that's something that gets left out. And
Yeah.
I think that's wrong, because now that you understand it, you have to say, oh, okay, well, that's why he's talking about render unto Caesar, but
Yeah.
give only to God what
Yeah.
is God's.
Don't you dare give him your worship.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he connected with every people group there that felt the weight of Caesar and what was supposed to be done.
Right.
But he also challenged every people group there by saying, be careful that you don't offer your worship.
Right.
Be careful that you don't bow the knee to Caesar
Yeah.
and give him authority where God hasn't given him authority.
Right.
And so they went away. They left him and they went away. In verse 23 says, the same day the Sadducees came to him. And the Sadducees, quick cliff note here, who say there is no resurrection. And the Sadducees asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses said if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now, in our scenario, there are 7 brothers. The first one married this woman and he died. Had no offspring left. So the second brother marries the woman. He dies too. And the third brother, down to the 7th, and after all 7 of them died, then the woman died.
Probably out of frustration.
When it comes time for the resurrection,
Right.
of the 7, whose wife will she be?
Well,
So they're trying to understand and wrestle with this Pharisaical understanding of resurrection and
right.
a restoration and a reproving of the physical body. And the Sadducees don't believe in any type of resurrection of the physical body, that it's a metaphor for what God's going to do. And So they are already they're just asking for him to answer the question in some way because they disagree with the idea that there's a resurrection at all. And this is a strange eschatological debate because there's many people even today that would go, well, that's just not true. That's not how the end times are going to go. And you know, there's so much diversity in understanding of the end times, and even there were in the Jewish culture. And so they're asking the question, whose wife is she going to be? And the question that we would ask, uh, what?
Yeah.
First of all, it definitely is in the law of Moses. Second of all,
Well,
didn't
it
we already
definitely, the
deal with?
law of Moses, as described by them, that's what would happen. That's the truism.
Yes.
That yes, the second son would, and the third son, and they
Yeah.
would continue that as a tradition because
Yes.
they're trying to provide offspring for their predeceased brother.
Yes, and the firstborn, whoever it is going to be named after the first brother,
Right, and then would pass on. It would
and would
pass
be the
on
Behor
well, and
of
it
the
pass on
family.
the inheritance.
Yes.
And that's how the inheritance had to be passed on. The first son attributed to the first brother, even though he's no longer present.
So the question is the law about the connection between the spouse, or is the law about preserving what God has given so that it can be handed down from generation to generation?
Here's the second thing.
And so then the question becomes, from the Sadducees, they say, well, whose wife is she at the resurrection? And the real question, in my opinion, is who is heartbroken over the loss of the heritage that should have been handed down?
That makes sense.
And Jesus says, you don't understand the resurrection. Because the partnering and the marriage between the two becoming one, the two becoming one doesn't mean they're one spirit or one flesh physically when it comes to the resurrection. They still are unique.
Right.
And so she's not anybody's wife except God's.
Right.
It's the marriage supper of the Lamb. We are connected, right? We are the bride and
Right.
Christ is the groom.
Mm-hmm.
And so they clearly didn't understand what is the resurrection.
Right. Well, they didn't understand. Well, he chastised them. He says you're wrong.
Yeah.
Not knowing the scripture nor the power of God. And I think that's once again it's
a pretty sharp accusation to the keepers of the law.
Yeah.
Like their definition is everything they have. They are experts at Torah and the Psalms.
Right. And the writings are very important to them. But like he said, he just says here, not attacking again, but he just says you're wrong. You don't understand.
Yeah.
I think the most effective is nor the power of God.
Yeah.
You don't understand how my Father is trying to teach you.
Yep. Because in the resurrection, there's not going to be any marriage or giving in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God, that I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob? He is not God of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. Jesus is saying, you're so worried about the resurrection and all these dead people, but my Father is God of the living.
Yeah. Well, isn't that the very idea of resurrection?
And he brings eternal life. Yeah. 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 So this is their first test, and they really struggled. Didn't do so hot testing Jesus, trying to catch him. Didn't work out well for them.
No.
Because now they kind of look like doofuses, and Jesus looks like he understands more than they do. Not what they were going for.
No.
And he answered in such a way that connected everybody to the conversation.
And this is after everyone questioned his shmika or his authority.
Yeah.
He's giving them what for in another way
Yeah.
by telling them you guys don't understand.
And then we're going to follow this conversation up with a different test. Have we heard this conversation before?
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the great debates, right?
Yeah.
And go ahead and read verses 34 through 40, and I'm going to connect us to another place where it's almost the same, but we're going to understand it a little differently.
When the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, or just he shut them up, they were gathered together. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him, Jesus, a question, tempting him and saying, Master, which is the greatest commandment in the law?
So what's he asking? What's the background? Remember, what is this question he's asking? What's the greatest commandment? Is there a law that's
Well,
more important than the other? Like they're all important laws, right?
right,
So what are they talking about?
honoring God above all
Yes.
else.
Yes.
That's the first law. That's the greatest law. That's what they're taught from the beginning, that God is the one that you honor first and only God.
Right. And we've talked about this, right? Like, let's even talk about the situation Rahab finds herself in. Rahab in Jericho.
Right.
She's lives in the wall, and she has these spies who come to her, and she's having this interaction with them, and then she hears this people coming to visit her, and so she hides the spies,
Right.
the Jewish spies.
Right.
She goes and stands at the door and says, "How can I help you?" And they say, "We hear there's spies, and that you have them here."
Now, let me ask you: was this just some people from the city, or was that her family that came?
Rahab?
Yeah.
This is Joshua and Caleb.
No, no, no. Who came to ask Rahab? We heard there are spies.
Oh, the king's guard.
Oh, kings. Okay, so it was someone from the king.
Yeah.
In Jericho. Okay. Yeah, I know who
they're
was
coming,
hiding.
Yeah, they're coming to hunt them down. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Why did they suspect that Rahab had them?
I wonder if they went. Yeah, somebody tipped them off.
Well,
there's an informant.
Rahab is a known prostitute.
Yeah, there's a narc in the wall.
Well, somebody said, "Hey, I saw somebody going in to visit with Rahab." Yeah. Everyone knowing
and
Rahab.
I don't know who they are. They're outsiders.
Right. So maybe that's why that someone saw just a nosy neighbor. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so
she hides them on the roof, and then they come in, say, "Where are the other guys?" She has a choice to make.
Right.
Whatever answer she gives, she's breaking the law. Right?
Law of the king.
Well, or God's law, even.
Well,
is she going to deal well with foreigners and show love and compassion on others, or is she going to lie? How does she make the decision which one's right? If I'm in a position that there's a way to say that this is right and this is wrong on both sides of the discussion, sounds an awful lot like politics in America these days. There's good stuff on both sides. The question then becomes that what this if you're going to try to argue that she didn't lie, but she did lie, I don't think you have much solid ground to stand on here. So she has okay.
But she hit him under the flax.
She has a couple of options.
Yeah. She weighed her options and thought, these are spies, but did they tell her who they were?
She was aware of who they were. Yeah.
Okay. So the history that even the people of Jericho knew
Oh, they were scared.
what they were afraid, and that these guys are spies from the powerful people group that's going to attack them possibly.
That are as many
She-
as ants. They covered the
She
ground.
was probably weighing her options, going, "I'm going to go with these guys."
So she had a decision to make. Do I trust God and show compassion and love towards others? Or
Do I lie to the king's men?
or do I lie to the king's men?
Well, we know the answer.
So she had to make a decision of which law was weightier, which is an intriguing conversation because she was a prostitute in a pagan nation.
Right.
So even she intuitively measured the weight of the law and said, it's better for me to take care of people.
Okay.
So this is this weighting of the law. It wasn't about whether it was right or wrong to do one or the other. It was which commandment, which instruction carries the most authority, carries the most power. And so it introduces us back into two people, right? Two different rabbis
Yeah.
who were teachers. Both of them said that the first and greatest commandment was to
Love the Lord your God.
love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And Shammai would say what?
It's an obedience
So he would say the second one would be
like unto it.
to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy.
Right.
It's a long way of getting around. You need to be obedient to the law. The law says it. I did it. The end. That would be the obedience. So Shammai would say, well, you tell the truth. You got to obey God.
Right.
Hillel, on the other hand, he'd say the first one's love God.
Yeah.
The second one,
And your neighbor likewise.
love your neighbor as yourself. So Hillel is love your neighbor. Shammai is you got to be obedient. Which one? Did Jesus have one that he sided with?
Well, the first.
The Hillel?
Yeah. The love.
Yeah, love.
That's what was his whole message was love.
So this lawyer, this keeper of the law, we get a similar interaction in Luke chapter 10, verse 25. Overlook the heading about this particular passage. Let's talk about what happened here. Luke chapter 10, verse 25. What type of person does yours say stood up?
It says, and behold, a certain lawyer stood up. And
Okay,
tempted
a
him.
lawyer. So we're still lawyering.
Well, it's
Isn't that what Matthew said?
still a Pharisee.
Matthew said a lawyer.
Yeah.
Luke is saying a lawyer.
Right.
All right, let's do this lawyer thing. So a lawyer stood up. To do what?
To tempt him. Well, it says in King James to tempt him or test him.
Yes, so mine says, and behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? What's he asking?
How can I get to heaven?
Seems as though he's asking, what's the most important commandment?
Well, is that the way it's supposed to look?
Well, what does Jesus say? Because this guy is testing Jesus, and he asks him a question, and Jesus does what you're not supposed to do. What does he do?
Ask him a question
He
back.
answers a question with a
Good
question.
Yeah.
And what does Jesus say?
What is written in the law?
How do you read the law?
Yeah. How readest thou is what it says.
Yeah. And what does the guy say in response?
And answering, he said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength.
Sounds
with
like
all
the
thy
first and
mind.
greatest commandment, right?
Yeah.
And then what does he say?
And thy neighbor as thyself.
Ooh.
He just ties it together.
So keeper of the law Oh, lawyer. Did he say it's all about the law? You got to be obedient to the law. We're keepers of the law. Is that what he said? Or did he say love? Which one is his yoke? What did he just say?
Well, he
Is this the obedience yoke or the love yoke that he just spouted back off?
tied them together and made them sound the same.
So love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength is the first and greatest one in both sides. Everybody, nobody disagreed with that.
Right.
But Hillel, the love yoke, what did they say? Love your neighbor as yourself. This sounds like that's what he said.
He says, thy neighbor as thyself.
So Jesus says, good job.
You've
I like
right.
it.
This do and thou shalt live. He says, you're right.
So
keep on going.
So it sounds like lawyer stood up and he said, I got you. Hey, what do I have to do to get eternal life?
Right.
And Jesus says,
what does the writing say?
What does the law say?
Yeah.
And he said, well, law says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And he says, then do that. I don't know why you're asking me this question. You're the keeper of the law.
You already know the answer.
You already know the answer. And, I mean, kind of makes the guy look silly, doesn't he? If you stood up to ask me a question and all I did was ask you a question, and you responded, you answered your own question, why are you asking me the question in the first place? So the guy is kind of offended.
Well, and say verse 29.
So he says, all right, I know how to catch him now.
And who is my neighbor?
And who's my neighbor? Okay. So we're going to read this passage that follows it. I think we all know what happens here. But let me just tell you what would be in their rabbinical practice. They would have stories, right?
Right.
They would teach in parables. They would teach in I just lost the word all of a sudden.
The remez, the hint.
They would do all of that. It's a long trip around the block to show you the answer that's right next door. It's not remez. It's not pshat. It's not drosh. It is bleh.
You'll think of it in a minute.
No, but yes, they use parables.
It's a way of telling the story by going all the way around the block.
Yeah, it's like it can't contradict the Bible. Man, if I had my phone that I think I left over there, I would just look at the text message that Nick and I had. And he would ask me, what is this word? Tell me the rules about it. Chelsea, what is the term for the stories that aren't in the Bible but can't contradict the Bible, that tell us other details that are shared from like ancient Hebrew traditions? Yes. Will you find my phone? This is going to drive me crazy. Yeah. Will you find my phone? Midrash. Sorry. Got it. Midrash. Yes. So the Midrash.
Okay.
So they would share Midrash, which is exactly what I just said 17 times, it feels like. Stories that tell stories that are connected to the Bible, connected to Scripture, connected to the law, but they can't contradict the law, but they add to help us get to Drosh, help us get to a deeper understanding.
Okay. So it's even more important than the remez of a biblical or a statement within the law.
Yes, so a rabbi is going to use those all the time.
Right.
Or they're going to teach in parables in the most common way in the first century. The most common template of how they communicated in parables to the Jewish people is the priest, the Levite, and the Pharisee. It goes something like this. They would give all of this backstory, and then they would say, and along came a priest. And a priest is What is a priest? It's a person who serves in the temple, right?
Right. Yeah.
What is the one overwhelming thing that we said about the priest who's a Sadducee? What's the thing that we said defines them realistically?
They're all about themselves, first of all.
Yes. What would be like? What's another term? One term that would say they're all about themselves.
They're selfish.
They were starts with a C. That would start with an S. Our politicians, we say about this is said about politicians.
Conceited.
It's corrupt.
Corrupt. Okay. Well, okay.
So they would say, and along came a priest, and then the priest would do whatever the clearly wrong thing to do in the situation, the priest would do that. Because
Okay.
the priest was
Did they use it as a saying, okay, priests aren't very good anyway?
Yeah, priests, they're part of they're corrupt. They have corrupted this system of worship.
Okay.
They are not.
So they use that as a starting point for a story.
Yeah, kind of
Along
like
came a priest.
yeah, kind of like a rabbi.
Priest, a rabbi, and a reverend walk into a bar.
Walk into a bar. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But for them, the parable would be this big backstory, and then along came a priest, and the priest, because of how corrupt they were, are basically just going to do whatever is wrong. The wrongest of wrong things,
Okay.
they're gonna do.
Especially in this particular story we're going to get into, it's the corrupt priest is self-centered. He's going to think
Yes.
about himself.
Yeah.
He is not going to do what he should do according to the customs and just the general.
And there are going to be justifications for why he doesn't.
Yeah. We understand that.
And then the Levite is going to come along. What's the Levite's job? What's the Levite supposed to do? Why does the Levite not have any inheritance in the land?
Because everything is given to him.
Because they're supposed to be caretakers of the temple, right?
Yeah.
They're not the ones who perform the sacrifices. They're not priests, but they take care of the temple. They clean the temple. They make sure it's tidy. They make sure it has all its provisions. So the Levites are going to do something wrong, but not for the same reason. They're still connected for some reason. Like they're not for some reason. They are still tied into this corrupt system because they have to prepare everything, and then the priests do all the corrupt things. So they're tied into it, and they know that it's wrong, but they're going to have a different reasoning for the wrong that they do. And again, it's going to be they're going to do these gymnastics.
Well, yeah, I serve in the temple, but I don't have to do.
Yes.
This.
Right. They're going to do all these gymnastics to get there.
Well, they had in their mindset they do a specific job and no other job.
Yes.
They're not responsible for anything outside the temple.
And then the part that is played that's going to draw everything together and make it all right and show you how to live the right way is the Pharisee. The Pharisee is going to come along and show us how it's supposed to be done correctly. And now this lawyer got embarrassed by Jesus, by him doing this rabbinical jujitsu and being asked a question and responding with a question. And the guy answered the question. He says, "Good job.
You knew it all along."
You knew it all along." And so he's going to do something very interesting. He's going to ask a question that mostly every Jewish person is going to agree on. And what's he going to ask? Who is my neighbor? So, yeah, I'm waiting.
No, go ahead.
So, every Jew, if they say, who is my neighbor? Let's talk about Shammai. Shammai's group of people. The Shammai lens
is only going to be those within the promise.
What any other Jew? Are they my neighbor?
No.
All the other Jews. Mm-hmm. People that are of the promise, people of Israel. Are they my neighbor?
Is that's what he's going to say? Yes.
Shammai is going to say yes. Well, what about Romans?
Well, no.
What about Gentiles?
No.
So Shammai is going to lean into the law that talks about obedience and us being set apart and us being people who are serving God and taking care of these
Right.
things and have God and God alone. And he's going to say that the law says, the law doesn't speak about outsiders at all. It talks about us as insiders,
Right.
as people of the promise, as people adopted by God, who are brought in, who have been chosen for a reason.
Okay.
And he gave us this word, he gave us these habits. And so the Romans, they're not part of this promise. But what about Hillel? Hillel and his love yoke. Are all the Jews my neighbors?
Yeah.
Yeah. What about the Romans?
No.
The Romans, not all Romans, if they're oppressive Romans and attacking Romans and people who are seeking my life, they're not my neighbor. But if they're peaceful Romans and
No, how can that be?
he didn't have to answer that question.
Okay. That's what I'm saying. That's the question I'm asking.
Yeah.
If it says that the love yoke includes everybody, all Jews, even Hillel, we're not looking at all of the Jews.
So Hillel said, yes, all the Jews. Any Jew
is within
any Jew is within
my neighborhood.
The love. They're part of my neighborhood.
Okay.
They are Mr. Rogers. He is my neighbor.
Right. Okay.
And there are some Gentiles
they're good guys,
who are good people, and I should treat them neighborly, but not all of them. There's some people who are. So now let me ask you about another group of people. How might the Shammai folks feel about Samaritans?
Not when they would walk miles out of their way to avoid Samaria.
So Shammai says, yes, any Jew is my neighbor.
Right.
Are the Romans my neighbor?
No.
Are the Samaritans my neighbor?
No.
Absolutely not. Yeah. Even less than the Romans.
Yeah. Romans live here, but the Samaritans, there's a boundary.
Now, what about Hillel? Hillel says, any Jew?
Yeah.
All the Romans?
No.
Not all. Some Romans?
Maybe.
Maybe. We can make a case for the centurion. Yeah. Right? The guy who actually came and asked Jesus to heal his son. And
well, you'd think that...
or heal his servant, right? Jairus, yeah. But now Hillel
have to draw a line in it.
Now Hillel says, well, what about those Samaritans?
Nope,
absolutely not. All right, so we've got some consensus here. So Jesus then says, well, okay, I'm glad you asked this question about the neighbors.
The priest comes along and he walks on one side of the road.
So he says, so here's what happens. A man leaves, let me see. Yes.
Yeah, he goes from Jerusalem down to Jericho.
He's going from Jerusalem down to Jericho.
Quite a hike.
Remember this question. He going from Jerusalem down to Jericho on his way. He gets beat up.
Fell among thieves.
Fell among thieves. They beat him.
Stripped him
of his clothes.
Wounded him.
Robbed him. Wounded him. And left him for dead. Mm-hmm. And along came a priest, and everybody goes, yeah, we know this story.
Yeah.
Priest, what's the priest gonna do?
He's gonna
whatever's wrong to do.
The worst wrong thing, yeah.
Now let me ask you a question. Where's the priest headed? Is the priest headed to Jericho?
No, he's going the other way.
He's going to Jerusalem. He's headed so he's going from Jericho to Jerusalem.
We don't know why he was in Jericho, but he was coming the other way.
But he's coming to Jerusalem.
Right.
What's he going to Jerusalem to do? He's a priest, right?
He's probably going to serve in the temple.
Going to serve in the temple. Man who's bloodied and left for dead on the side of the road. Is he clean or unclean?
Oh, he'd be definitely unclean.
So the priest is clean. Yeah, he's gone through a ceremonial cleansing. Now he's on his way to serve in the temple. So he's justified.
He can't be you can't be
You can't be made
unclean
unclean.
because there's no place to become clean if he helps this.
So maybe he's going to interact with the next person he sees along the way and send them.
Hey, go back and look for this guy.
There's a man.
Maybe.
That would be a great justification if you were a Sadducee, wouldn't it? That's what I mean. I understand your story,
I can't
but
help
he
you.
couldn't. He couldn't help him. He would be unclean. He couldn't get into the temple.
And he says, "Well, I can't help you now, but I'll send somebody."
So the Pharisee, these Hillel people, because the lawyer said I'm a Hillel guy,
Mm-hmm.
and which law is weightier for the priest? Which one is
first.
more important?
The first.
Love your neighbor as well. If I was laying in that position, I want somebody to help me, right? This is the Hillel position, but the priest came along and didn't do it.
Right. He couldn't.
Couldn't. So he goes on.
He had the best excuse that he could think of.
Yes, exactly.
Obviously, he hadn't seen Jesus performing miracles,
Yes.
being unclean at the same time.
So
obviously
then,
he's out of the loop.
yeah, he hasn't.
He didn't get.
He's unaware.
Yeah. Well, he didn't have the right app on his phone
Yeah,
to be
nice
included in
guy.
the conversation.
Didn't have the news, right? Couldn't.
Right.
Didn't hear the update.
He's coming from Jericho.
He's not in the automatic updates guy. It didn't.
Been out of touch. Didn't have
Poor signal. Yeah.
Didn't have signal on his phone.
Yeah.
Couldn't be included in the conversation. Okay, so
then along
he's
comes.
coming, but he's justifying it because of his position.
Sure.
He's justifying it because of his cleanliness.
Yes, but the Hillel people are still looking at this story going, yes, definitely. That is the absolute wrong thing to do.
Right.
I understand all of your justification, but you can cleanse yourself again when you get there.
Yeah.
That guy's life is still more important.
Because if you got to love him.
You got to love him. He's your brother. He's your neighbor for sure, right? We're Jews.
Yeah.
Neighbor. Along comes a Levite. You got to be clean to work in the temple. He's like, I would, but they kind of need me. If I don't get there,
I got to do my job.
Yeah, I have a
important
job to do. I've got to get there on time. Yeah. Otherwise, that other guy, he's going to have to work overtime. Company's going to be mad. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to have to meet with my union steward, get served a notice, and have to.
Also, it's outside the scope of his abilities.
Yes, this isn't my.
This is not a temple thing.
Yes, not a temple thing.
I'm not a.
So there's a different justification, but still just as wrong.
I'm not a certified EMT.
Yeah.
I'm a janitor in the temple.
I have no idea how to identify this guy's wounds. Do I need to pick him up? Do I need to lay him down? Do I need to pick his feet up? Put his feet down. Do I need to bandage his head? Do I need to blow on it? Do I need to kiss it? Do I need to call his mom, dad, aunt, uncle?
Outside of his scope.
Yeah, this doesn't. So he just goes to the other side of the road and keeps going.
Right. But he's also coming from Jericho.
Yeah, he's also coming from Jericho.
And not going to Jericho because he would not worry about being clean.
Headed to Jerusalem.
Right. He's headed. So he must have been following the priest.
So now we're in first century Jerusalem. We're on the Temple Mount. We've just got done with this whole teaching. We've talked about the resurrection. We've moved on. Lawyer stands up trying to catch Jesus, says, how do I get eternal life? And Jesus says, well, how do you read the law? And he says, well, I read it to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And he's like, you're right. Do that.
You've taken the Hillel position.
Great work. Yeah, I'm all in. Love is the answer. And then he's like, well, who is my neighbor? And he's a Hillel guy. And he's like, Hillel says, and this teaching says that every Jew is my neighbor and some Romans. And then Jesus begins to tell, well, I can help you with this. So, the story, there's a priest and a Levite and a Pharisee, right?
This is what they do.
And so let me tell you this story, and he tells them the story of this person, and the priest has come by, and the Levite has come by. Who's coming next?
A Samaritan.
And then along comes a Samaritan, and everybody goes, you blasphemer. That is not how we tell stories around here. Everybody's ears perked up and paid attention. They said, well, the next person in the story is supposed to be a Pharisee. A Pharisee is supposed to come next. And Jesus says, and along came a Samaritan, and they said, don't you do it. Because what's the Pharisee supposed to do?
Help.
The Pharisee's supposed to do what's right.
Mhm.
The Pharisee's supposed to be the caretaker of love.
Right. And follower of the law.
And the follower of the law. The follower not of the letter of the law, but the heart of the law.
Yeah.
And he says, and along came a Samaritan, saw the man in need,
And had compassion.
and bound his wounds, put him up on his donkey, took him to the next town, asked a person. So what's the implication here? Let's just ask a couple of implication questions right here. If he picks up Jewish man on the road between Jericho, which is, what type of city is Jericho?
Well, it's a pagan city.
Is it?
Well,
I think you probably ought to check your map again.
it's fallen down. It's been destroyed.
It did fall down, and now it's back together.
Okay.
But it's inside of the boundary of Judah.
Judah, right?
So going from Jewish capital of Jerusalem to Jewish city in Jericho, when he stops at an inn between the two places, who's he talking to? Is he talking to a Jewish innkeeper?
I don't know. It doesn't say. But
That would be the implication, though, right?
yeah. Well, he went the inn or the and
Like, who can own property in this time at this pace,
okay.
working under the law?
Is
Who
this,
can own property
is
in
this inn another actual inn or is this someone's house?
This is an inn. This
So
is the
it's
actual term.
So it's actual.
This is
motel.
not Cataluma.
Yeah, it's actually a hotel.
Actually a hotel.
Or a staying place in the city of Jericho.
Or some along the road.
Close, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a Jewish owned property.
Yeah.
He took him into there.
He says, can you take care of him? He says, it's going to cost you, Ike. Who's going to pay for him? Here's 2 denarius. Take care of anything he needs, and when I come back, I'll take care of everything. All his expenses, everything. It's not going to cost him anything. He's been robbed. He's been left for dead. I want you to help care for him. So he took him. Hillel says, who's my neighbor?
Jewish.
All Jewish people.
Right.
So this Jewish man is lying for dead on the side of the road, and Jesus said, Jewish man passed him by, Jewish man passed him by, and Samaritan, who's hated, definitely not my neighbor, picks him up, takes care of him, takes him to his Jewish neighbor, says, I'll take care of all the expenses. You just make sure take care of it.
Well, and this could have been his kinfolk that owned the inn, too.
Could have.
We don't know because he was on his way to Jericho.
Yes.
And evidently the Samaritan was on his way to Jericho also.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
Maybe he was just passing through, though, because he might not have been welcomed in a Jewish town.
So he says, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to this man? And he said, how did he respond? He's like, oh, it was the Samaritan. That's not how he answered him. What did he tell him? In verse 37.
He said, he that showed mercy.
The one that showed him mercy.
Didn't call the guy out by name, obviously.
No.
But whoever showed mercy is the neighbor.
Yeah. He said, go and do likewise. Pretty strong.
Yeah, well, he put the entire crowd to the test.
Oh, yeah.
And he guaranteed himself the correct answer by presenting to them a person that might have shown no mercy whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because no Jew would have shown the Samaritan mercy.
Right.
Had he known who it was. And I guess I guess, this man was robbed and beaten, left for dead,
Yep.
clothing stripped, robbed with no identification marks because they probably took everything that was of value or of use to them.
Yep.
So, other than seeing sign of circumcision, he wouldn't have known that the man was a Jew, a Samaritan, a Roman, or anything.
Yeah.
He just showed mercy because this was a person in need.
Yes. So just the Peshat level says Jesus is talking to them and he says, I know some of you are Shammai people who say that obedience is the right thing and that the priest and the Levite are both justified. He said, but you, lawyer, you answered with a Hillel answer that love the Lord your God and your neighbor. He said, that's the right thing to do. So you want to know who's your neighbor? And Hillel would say, your neighbor is all the Jewish people and maybe some Romans.
Maybe a Gentile or two.
Maybe a Gentile or two, but I'm telling you, the people that are doing the right thing are the people that you're avoiding. People that you want nothing to do with. People that you go out of your way to avoid and not have anything to do with. That those people are just as much your neighbor. Those people who no one cares for, no one wants to include. And so Jesus takes it so much further that they're all just dumbfounded. Like won't even answer with the name of the people that he just mentioned, because he's supposed to have said Pharisee. But Jesus just changed everything. So I mentioned that that's on the Peshat level, right? Because we can read it and have
right. That's
all the surface
story.
level.
Yeah.
What if there's a hint at something else going on here? What if there's some other something? Let me read you what that some other something might be. In 2 Chronicles chapter 28.
Hang on a second. It'll take me a second to get there. I can find 2 Chronicles chapter
28. Going to read about Ahaz in Judah. I'm going to start in verse 1 and just read through this.
I'm almost there. These pages are sticking together.
Do you want me to tell you what page it is in my Bible?
That doesn't count. An old joke. This Bible is not mine. Chapter 28. Ahaz was 20 years old.
Yeah, Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done. But he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. He even made metal images for the Baals, and he made offerings in the valley of the son of Hinnom, Ben Hinnom, and burned his sons as an offering, according to the abominations of the nations, whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. And he sacrificed and made offerings on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. Therefore the Lord God gave him into the hand of the king of Syria, who defeated him and took captive a great number of his people and brought them to Damascus. He was also given into the hand of the king of Israel, who struck him with great force. For Pekah the son of Remaliah killed 120,000 from Judah in one day, all of them men of valor, because they had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. And Zikri, a mighty man of Ephraim, killed Maashiah, the king's son, and Azrikam, the commander of the palace, and Elkanah, the next in authority to the king. The men of Israel took captive 200,000 of their relatives, women, sons, and daughters. They also took much spoil from them and brought the spoil to
Samaria.
Samaria. But a prophet of the Lord was there, whose name was Oded. And he went out to meet the army that came to Samaria and said to them, Behold, because the Lord, the God of your fathers, was angry with Judah, he gave them into your hand. But you have killed them in a rage that has reached up to heaven. And now you intend to subjugate the people of Judah and Jerusalem, male and female, as your slaves. Have you not sins of your own against the Lord your God? Now hear me and send back the captives from your relatives whom you have taken, for the fierce wrath of the Lord is upon you. Certain chiefs also of the men of Ephraim, Azariah the son of Johanan, Berechiah the son of Meshillemoth, Jehizkiah the son of Shallum, and Amasa the son of Hadlai, stood up against those who were coming from the war, and said to them, You shall not bring the captives in here, for your purpose to bring upon us guilt against the Lord, in addition to our present sins and guilt, for our guilt is already great, and there is fierce wrath against Israel. So the armed men left the captives and the spoil before the princes and all the assembly. And the men who have been mentioned by name rose and took the captives. With the spoil they clothed all who were naked among them. They clothed them and gave them sandals, provided them with food and drink, and anointed them. And carrying all the feeble among them on donkeys, they brought them to their kinsfolk
Jericho.
at Jericho, the city of palm trees. Then they returned to Samaria. Seems like we have a story that has all the same elements.
And the captives were returned
To Jericho,
Jericho, which was in Judah.
which was in Judah.
Okay. They could have been left in Samaria.
Who took them captive?
No. Those from Israel.
People from Israel, which
The
northern kingdom. They took captive their brothers and sisters and intended to make them slaves. This is the remez that Jesus brings up. This is all the pieces. Hey, you're a keeper of the law. I got a great story for you. Who's my neighbor? You know, I got a great story for you. What about those Samaritans? They're like, Samaritans? Who's anointing people and meeting their needs and carrying them back to Jericho that are Samaritans? And he goes, oh no. There's a story about this.
Yeah, I've heard this. Or I've studied.
And all these studied people who are on the Temple Mount still listening around going, because this is on the same day.
Yeah.
Story from Matthew tells us on the same day. They come and say, what's the greatest commandment? A lawyer stands up to test him and says, it's the greatest commandment. And here we are on the same day. Well, how do I get eternal life? How do you read the law? Love the Lord your God. Love your neighbor as yourself. He's like, yep, good, do it. Who's my neighbor? Let me tell you a story about a Samaritan. They're like, no, wrong story. But as he's finishing up, Samaritans, Jericho, caring for all their needs, being anointed, carrying them on donkeys.
Sounds familiar.
You're trying to tell us that we're holding on to the law and trying to carry off our brothers as captives. And it's all these outsiders who are going to remind us of the law and remind us of the humanity of others to meet their needs so that they can go back home and be back in the promise and have the chance to prosper again.
Yep.
Seems like a pretty strong indictment.
It's no wonder that they marveled at the story,
Yeah.
even though they were shocked at the beginning in the very word Samaritan.
Yeah. Pharisee, or no, the priest comes along. Yep. Right where he should. Bet a Levite comes next. No way, he wouldn't do that. Yeah. Levite's coming next, I promise. I've heard this story before. You have? Yeah. And then a Levite comes along. Told you. All right, smarty pants, who comes next? It's always a Pharisee. Pharisee always comes next. You need to know what the Pharisee does. They're going to do the right thing. Don't worry. And then a Samaritan comes along. I thought you said you knew the story. I did. He's going off script. Peter's probably looking over at John going,
Wait a minute, we've heard this before.
hey,
You think the boss has got his story wrong?
what's our escape plan? What do you mean? He just mentioned Samaritan. Yeah, I heard him. Do we have an escape plan? Because we might die right here. No. Boss has got it. He mentioned Samaritans. And the part of the story is supposed to be Pharisees. Are you sure? Trusted him this far. Feel like we're doing okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's Peter and John, the
Yeah.
oldest,
Yeah.
probably got far enough along that they understood or had been
Yeah.
told to memorize Chronicles at this point.
Yeah. So when they get to it and they're going, all these people are they're having to wrestle with a whole new. You know, everybody uses this story from Second Chronicles to tell you about how to treat your neighbor, right? Such a common remez. But Chronicles is going to be pretty new, right?
To them, yeah.
Chronicles is going to be the newer version of history that's told after the fact, looking back with hindsight and being like, yeah, you know, that was wrong. People of Israel should have never come along and tried to take us as prisoners and slaves. And it was these guys that stood all alone and challenged the way that everybody thought was right.
They challenged the princes of Israel.
And showed us these guys from Samaria who challenged the leaders, show them how to treat your neighbors, and finally said, well, we'll just lay everything down. You do what's right. And so they took the anointing oil and they anointed the people so they could be healed. Put sandals on their feet and clothes on the ones who were naked to give them back their provision. Saddled up donkeys and put the people who were lame and couldn't. And they took them all the way back home, back to the place where they were supposed to be in the first place. What did all those people from Israel do? What did all those leaders and princes and authority people who, men of valor who had just captured all these 200,000 people of they just stood there and watched them do it. Went back about their way. No, the 200,000 went their way. I'm saying the people who captured the 200,000. They set at these people in front of these four princes, and these four men seems like did all the work. While the men of Israel just got annoyed and watched it happen. Seems like we're on a Temple Mount up here, and Jesus is talking about neighbors. And these people are being challenged because it seems like they're fighting with their own kin over who's right and who's wrong and who's captive and who's not captive. And Jesus is saying, well, it's a few people who are, if you'll listen to them, are telling you that people are people, carry the image of God.
Well,
And
at the end
God's expectation is,
the end of 15, it says they set them upon donkeys and brought them to Jericho, the city of palm trees, to their brethren. Then they, the helpers
yeah.
from Samaria, returned to Samaria. And verse 16, at that time did King Ahaz send unto the kings of Assyria to help him.
Mm-hmm.
If you need any help, I'm going to send some guys to
Yeah.
help you from Jerusalem.
Yeah. He asked the king of Assyria for help
Yeah.
because the Edomites had again invaded and defeated Judah and carried away captives, and the Philistines had made raids on the cities in the Shephelah and the Negeb of Judah, and had taken Beth Shemesh and Ajalon and Gederoth and Soko with its villages, Timnah with its villages, Gimzo with its villages, and they settled there. For the Lord humbled Judah because of Ahaz, king of Israel.
Right.
For he had made Judah act sinfully and had been very unfaithful to the Lord. It's interesting that he calls on Assyria for help, calls on that foreign superpower for help instead
Right.
of
Well, isn't
calling
Syria
on
the one that had conquered Israel in the first place?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Why doesn't Ahaz just call on God for help?
Evidently, that wasn't his thing because
Yeah.
he did wrong in the eyes of the Lord anyway, to the point where he was burning his own kids.
Oh, this is even better. Ooh, I didn't get to this part. For the Lord humbled Judah because of Ahaz, king of Israel, for he had made Judah act sinfully and had been very unfaithful to the Lord. So Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came against him and afflicted him instead of strengthening him. For Ahaz took a portion from the house of the Lord and the house of the king and of the princes and gave tribute to the king of Assyria, but it did not help him. What story did we just come after? They asked Jesus, is it lawful to do what? To pay tribute to Caesar. He says, well, whose image is on here? It says, give to Caesar that which is Caesar's. But give to God that which is God's. And it seems like the same story here. Ahaz
Gave to the king of Assyria.
He took from all of the princes and all of the other leaders and even from the house of the Lord, and he made a tribute to the Assyrian king, and it didn't help him. And he asked the Assyrian king, seems like they might be asking Caesar for help at some point in this week leading up to the death of Jesus. It seems historically that they were the leaders of the temple were asking the Romans for help. And did it help them?
Not really.
Not really. In the end, it did not,
Mm-mm.
because they had been unfaithful.
Well, they thought that they could give him to the Romans,
Yeah.
and the Romans said, "No, you take care of it. It's not our problem."
And interestingly enough, in this remez, there's a chiasm.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say chiasm.
There's a chiasm, and the central point is that verses 12 through 15 would be the center of the chiasm.
Yeah.
So one of two things is happening in the center of this chiasm. Either the center of this teaching is about people being named by name and God being aware of who we are
Right.
and our purpose and calling us to a specific purpose, or the center of the chiasm because they're named and then this thing happens and then they're named again, or it's about caring for the needs of others and recognizing the neighborliness. And it even says in the middle there, that why would we act sinfully and add to our own sin and guilt?
Yeah.
Like, regardless of how they have acted,
Yeah. Because doing so
we already have enough of our own sin and guilt. Why would we act hatefully towards someone else and try to make them indebted to us?
Yeah. Because you don't profit by it.
Because I'm not profiting by it.
No.
And they're not profiting by it. And they're supposed to be our kin.
Right.
And so this is the center of this chiasm that is the remez
Yeah.
to this conversation on the Temple Mount. And we're going to finish chapter 22 next week, but man, does it change the story of the Samaritan a little bit for you?
Yeah, well, especially when you link it to, like we said, we're talking about Peshat, the story.
Yeah.
Then we get the Remez. But you have to say, I've never read it this way, once again. So I think we read in Chronicles.
Yeah.
And then we forget.
Oh, that's a good story.
We don't.
I didn't think I would have left that out of the history
we
books.
forget.
Yeah.
We don't go to Deuteronomy.
Yeah. Remember, don't forget.
We don't go to that when we get to the story of the Good Samaritan, because we've always heard the story of the Good Samaritan, but we've never delved into why the priest passed by.
Yeah.
Why the Levite passed by.
Mm-hmm.
We only look at the good guy, the Samaritan. Yeah. And I've never had it linked to anything.
Yeah.
Now I can go back and say, oh, 2 Chronicles.
And in the Jewish tradition,
28.
That's supposed to be a Pharisee.
Right. Also, in this whole thing, we have talked from the beginning about what is the custom from the time of the beginning of taking care of strangers, aliens, orphans, and widows.
AOWs, yeah.
Where is that? Why is that not a constant reminder that this is the heritage of the entire culture?
Yeah. And it's interesting that in 2 Chronicles chapter 28, King Ahaz in Judah gets conquered. And then the people of Israel, who have reestablished their kingdom, go, you know, it'd be a good idea. They're weak right now.
Let's go get some.
And we need some help. We can get some free labor. We can get some cheap labor. Let's just go get it'll be better for them to be in our care than a slave somewhere else. Let's just carry them off and have them work for us.
Bet they were going to take them to Samaria.
Which is, at the time would have been in the northern kingdom of Israel.
Right.
So by the time we get to Israel, which is later on, by the time we get to Jesus' day, what would have been the northern kingdom of Israel is Syria.
Right.
And so Judea and Judah is all there is of Israel now.
Right.
And so their land area is much less drastic.
Oh, yeah.
Than it used to be. But I wonder if it's about their faithfulness and their offering of sacrifices
to Baal,
to other gods. I wonder if that's true from 2 Chronicles 28. I guess we'll never know.
Yep. So next week, end of 22.
We're gonna finish up chapter 22.
Promise.
Yeah, because there's only one more little section, and it's about whose son is the Christ.
Right.
And so, the Samaritan is a little deeper conversation than than probably we've really understood. But it's just maybe the uh, single best rabbinical response to any question ever, because it took a rabbinical norm and transformed it with just the changing of one word,
Mm-hmm.
changing of Pharisee to Samaritan.
Right.
And
And
God did what the prayer of Jabez asked for: spread wide the tent,
yeah.
made room for so many more people to be free
Yeah.
and cared for and returned home.
Well, there were still the uh, stubborn ones.
Yeah.
They still sought to trick Jesus at every turn because he kept proving them wrong or proving them inadequate. I think
Yeah.
not wrong, but just he kept proving them, showing them how inadequate they were in gathering
Yeah.
the people to the truth.
And I love how Jesus finishes the conversation in Matthew chapter 22, in verse 40. He says, on these two laws hang all of the law and the prophets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All the writings of the New Testament um, disciples changes. Yeah. That's crazy too. You bring up Hebrews because the guy that I listened to that talked about some of this, he says Rahab goes from being a pagan who has to differentiate between what's right and wrong in the law when she was separated from the law, didn't know the law at all, to being mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11 in the hall of faith.
Yeah.
And she's mentioned in Matthew in the heritage of who Jesus
in the
is.
lineage.
In the lineage of Jesus.
Sunday we talked about that. With people say, "Why is she there?" Because they've read the Bible at all, and the story of Jericho, which is a common story,
Yeah.
and very much a central character in that story.
Yeah.
Suddenly, here she appears in Matthew is in the lineage of Jesus. How? It's
and if you're a follower of Hillel,
yeah,
and his yoke of love, you go, absolutely, Rahab has to be included in there because she figured out how to love others above just being obedient to the letter of the law.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to be back next week. This one carried a little long, but man,
Good stuff.
lots of good stuff.
Thank you, and see you next week.
Yeah, we'll be here.